Welcome. I'm Catherine Hadro, and this is EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Presumptive President-elect Joe Biden nominates California's Attorney General to be the HHS Secretary, the same man who faced off against the Little Sisters of the Poor and pro-life pregnancy centers at the Supreme Court. Analysis ahead. Plus, pro-life scientists reveal their latest research on COVID-19 vaccines and the involvement of abortion-derived cells.
I almost died and now I'm alive, and I'm going to speak out for those who have no voice, and I really don't care what people say about me. Even if they say I don't trust black women, I trust black women, I love black women, I am a black woman.
And standing firm. A pro-life advocate testified this week at a virtual congressional hearing on abortion funding. She shares her experience as the only pro-life witness present. Pro-life leaders call on the Senate to reject presumptive President-elect Joe Biden's nominee to lead his Health and Human Services Department. Biden has picked California Attorney General Xavier Becerra to be his health secretary, immediately raising concerns for Catholics and pro-lifers, as he has a history of battling them in court. Becerra faced off against the National Institute of Family and Life Advocates, or NIFLA, at the Supreme Court in 2018 over a California law requiring pro-life pregnancy centers advertise for abortions. Becerra lost. He also lost his high court battle with the Little Sisters of the Poor this summer after challenging the religious group's exemption of the Affordable Care Act's contraceptive mandate. The California Attorney General preceding Becerra was Kamala Harris, the now presumptive Vice President-elect. For a reaction to this HHS news and more, we're joined via Skype by Dr. David Prentice, Vice President and Research Director for the Charlotte Lozier Institute, and a second pro-life scientist, Dr. Tara Sandra Lee, Senior Fellow and Director of Life Sciences at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Welcome back to both. Dr. Sandra Lee, what's your reaction that Biden has nominated Xavier Becerra as the next HHS secretary? What pro-life concerns does this raise for you?
Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, this is incredibly concerning. And in my opinion, it is disappointing and unacceptable. I mean, Xavier Becerra has demonstrated time again that his position is very extreme when it comes to abortion. So he would undoubtedly strip away all of the pro-life progress that has been made over the last 4 years under President Trump and Secretary Azar. And we know from his time in Congress and in California as Attorney General that he sought to penalize pro-life Americans just because of their deeply held beliefs that abortion is wrong and that it kills an innocent unborn child. So in my position, this was an incredibly poor decision.
Dr. Prentice, as a pro-life scientist yourself, what do you want our viewers to know about Xavier Becerra?
Thanks, Catherine. Well, Mr. Becerra has never been a friend of pro-lifers. As a congressman, he voted in favor of the horrific partial birth abortion. As California Attorney General, he persecuted, not prosecuted, but persecuted citizen journalist David Daleiden when David exposed Planned Parenthood's involvement in buying and selling aborted baby body parts and trafficking in those parts. He tried to force pro-life pregnancy centers in California to advertise and refer for abortions in a case that he actually lost at the Supreme Court, where they deemed it unconstitutional. And he's also sued to reverse conscience protections for doctors and nurses who declined to participate in abortion. He is simply no friend to pro-lifers.
If confirmed, Becerra would be in a leading role to oversee the Biden-Harris administration's coronavirus response. And with that, stay with me because I'd like to expand this conversation to COVID now and the latest on COVID vaccines. As the United Kingdom begins administering the first shots of the COVID-19 vaccine this week, the English and Welsh Bishops' Conference tells the Catholic faithful they can receive the AstraZeneca vaccine without sin, even though the vaccine was developed from cell lines originating from the cells of an unborn child who was aborted in 1983. The bishops cited church understanding that a person in good conscience and for grave reason may receive a vaccine sourced in this way, provided there's sufficient moral distance between the present administration of the vaccine and the original wrongful action. The chair of the bishop's social justice department stated, quote, "In the COVID-19 pandemic, we judge that this grave reason exists and that one does not sin by receiving the vaccine." The pro-life research group, the Charlotte Lozier Institute, has published a new chart detailing whether the 8 leading COVID-19 vaccine candidates supported by Operation Warp Speed are produced or tested using cells derived from abortions. Analysis revealed most vaccine candidates did not use abortion-derived cell lines in their production. Several used abortion-derived cell lines in laboratory testing, or their use in testing could not be determined. Dr. Prentice and Dr. Sandra Lee, you two are behind this updated vaccine chart. Which vaccines were determined to be the most ethical in your eyes? Dr. Sandra Lee.
Thank you, Catherine. Yeah, this chart that we now provide on our website, the goal is that it provides the most accurate and updated information so that people can make a very well-informed decision as these vaccines become available. So as you mentioned, the great news is that the majority of them in Operation Warp Speed do not use fetal cell lines in the production. That is the way that they are made, what is going to actually be injected into the individual. And so we know actually in 75% of them, so 6 out of the 10 do not use fetal cell lines in production. When we look carefully at these and look at which ones those are, we know that for 3 of them, they are using a newer method or approach that doesn't use any cells at all in making these vaccines. And these include the Pfizer and the Moderna mRNA vaccine and the Inovio DNA vaccine. And then the other 3 use an alternative cell lines, such as insect cell lines or animal cell lines, in order to produce their vaccine. And these include Novavax, Merck, and the Sanofi vaccines. And so this is incredibly positive and encouraging news that we have now, looks like 6 leading vaccines in Operation Warp Speed that are using alternative methods that do not rely on fetal cell lines for production.
Which one is the most concerning to you, Dr. Sandra Lee?
Well, when we look carefully at this, there are 2, and one of them you mentioned, which is the AstraZeneca vaccine, as well as the Johnson & Johnson, that do use fetal cell lines to produce or make their vaccine. And this is controversial. And while there's no ongoing destruction of babies in order to make these vaccines, the connection still exists. We do know that these cell lines were derived from a past abortion. And so this really puts Americans then in a difficult position when we could look at these 2 vaccines, because Americans are then faced with, as they face these vaccinations, then they are looking at possibly going against their own moral stance when it comes to abortion.
Dr. Prentice, even though Charlotte Lozier and other Catholic bioethicists have deemed Pfizer and Moderna vaccines as ethical, there seems to be confusion and concerns surrounding the testing of the vaccines. Can you address those concerns about fetal cell lines, especially when it comes to our Catholic understanding of it?
Certainly. Let's first deal with production. As Dr. Sandra Lee has talked about, this involves how the vaccine is actually made. Are there any cell lines, fetal cell lines of these controversial types that are used? Are there other types of cells, or any cells at all? Was there any contact with those fetal cell lines as it was being produced that might even have left trace components behind? Bottom line is, production deals with what is going to go into my arm as a vaccine recipient. Testing, we should think about that as quality control. These are confirmatory tests on the finished product. Things like vaccinating mice and then testing whether antibodies are being produced by those mice, actually vaccinating cells in the lab to see whether the vaccine product the actual protein that they're after is being produced within the cells. Now, the testing does not directly connected to that product that goes into the recipient. So it's another level removed, but because the company and their collaborators may have used those abortion-derived cell lines in the testing, there is still a matter of concern here. And it also gives us an opportunity, though, to encourage these vaccine producers to use licit cell lines and licit methods.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Prentice, if Xavier Becerra is confirmed HHS Secretary, do you have concerns about the ethics on COVID vaccine research and development moving forward?
There are big concerns here. Under President Trump and Secretary Azar, great advances have been made in the pro-life cause, but as Secretary Becerra will almost certainly turn back this to a culture of death, not just in terms of vaccine ethics, but fetal tissue research, trafficking in aborted baby body parts, embryo research, and abortion.
Well, we are so grateful for your research, both of you. Thank you. For our viewers, you can find more information on the vaccines by going to lozierinstitute.org. Doctors David Prentice and Tara Sandra Lee from the Charlotte Lozier Institute, thank you both.
Thank you so much.
We have good news. Pro-life scientists confirmed to us that most COVID-19 vaccines do not use fetal cell lines from abortions in production. You just heard this straight from Dr. David Prentice and Dr. Tara Sandra Lee of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, who researched whether the leading COVID-19 vaccines are produced or tested using cells derived from abortions. And as they just told us, they found a majority of them do not contain these cells in the final product. As citizens and as Catholics, join us in sharing the truth on this pro-life research. That brings us to this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com and sign our petition that you will get the word out that a majority of leading COVID-19 vaccines do not use fetal cell lines from abortions in production. It is vital we let our fellow Catholics know about the nature of these vaccines so that they can make informed decisions that put their health, safety, and deeply held moral beliefs first. We must continue to encourage vaccine developers to use alternatives to abortion-derived fetal cells moving forward. Join us in sharing the truth on this latest pro-life research by signing our petition at prolifeweekly.com. A call for an alternative feminism. A Catholic writer and thinker is pushing for a different kind of feminism, particularly for American Christians. Leah Labresco-Sargent, a convert to Catholicism and author of books like Arriving at Amen and Building the Benedict Option, is now writing a newsletter dedicated to exploring feminism. In an interview on the topic with the Christian online platform Mere Orthodoxy, Sargent discusses the definition of feminism and cultural problems when it comes to life and family. She says, quote, "For all the discussion we have about abortion, you'd think people are having too many children they don't want. But women have way fewer children than they want, and that's every bit as deserving of conferences, policy papers, and questions at debates as the pay gap." To tell us more, we're joined on Skype by Leah Labresco-Sargent herself. Leah, welcome. Let's just dive right into that quote of yours I mentioned. Feminists have promised more freedom and support for women, but why do you think women are having fewer babies today? Are women as free as feminists promised women would be if there was access to abortion?
I think in a lot of cases, people, even people who support abortion are fighting in good faith, trying to expand options for women. But what happens is not only the intrinsic violence of abortion, but that there are a lot of people invested in shaping what women choose when we say we're being pro-choice or putting more options on the table. You see this even with options like egg freezing offered by companies like Google, which are meant to expand the choices that their employees can ostensibly make, but give the employer a lot more leverage to try and pressure women into delaying having children so that they don't disrupt the plans their employer has for them.
You've been dedicating your writings and thoughts on feminism in a new Substack. And just so our viewers are aware, Substack is an increasingly popular way for writers to connect with their readers. It's an email newsletter that writers can charge money for. Leah, what prompted this new newsletter? What is this new alternative feminism you're thinking through and writing about?
I think this is a question I've been thinking about for a while, but after the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett, there was a prominent article by Ross Douthat calling for a conservative feminism, and then just an outpouring of articles by women I really admire, like Jennifer Frey, Erica Bakioki, exploring this idea. But articles kind of get published and then editors move on to the next topic. And I wanted a sustained newsletter so people could stay on this topic and keep benefiting from creating connections to each other and helping each other out.
As Catholics, Leah, we are called to really live in a countercultural way. What does that mean for Catholic women and feminism?
I think it means being really fearless about risk and dependence. That we live in a culture, that tells us to wait for marriage until everything is squared away, to wait for children until everything is perfect. And there's a real gift in offering the witness of not everything in my life is perfect. Not everything in my life is under my control. That's true of everyone, but I think it's a little easier for us to admit it, especially as we know that God is shaping our lives. But the more we tell women that their job is to be on top of everything and only act where they have perfect control, the more we're telling women they don't and won't ever have permission to have children, to have marriages, to take chances.
We just have a minute left, Leah, but as a young mother yourself, has anything opened your eyes to ways we can truly better build a culture of life?
I think one of the biggest ones is seeing other people's children. I've wanted children for a while, but one of the things that really made me feel ready, which was a question I didn't know the answer to, was babysitting my friend's 2-year-old for 2 days while she went on a vacation with her husband. I think the more that people live in kind of childless communities, the harder it is to discern marriage or whether you're ready for children, because they're this kind of ambiguous threat rather than a lived reality.
Leah Labresco-Sargent, thank you so much for your thoughtfulness and congratulations on this new newsletter.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, a Hollywood actress apologizes for raising money for a pro-life Christian organization seeking to end human trafficking. I'll speak out when we return.
And we can use all sorts of words to describe abortion, but we can never deny the fact that abortion is the intentional taking of a human life. And taxpayers who are morally opposed to this, whether it's for religious reasons or secular reasons, should not be forced to have to fund this.
And defending the unborn, pro-life lawmakers on Capitol Hill push back against plans to use taxpayer dollars to fund abortions. We'll speak to a pro-life advocate who testified during a congressional hearing this week. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. A Hollywood actress pools her donation to a pro-life group fighting human trafficking and backs Planned Parenthood instead. That is this week's Speak Out segment. Actress and comedian Melissa McCarthy teamed up with HBO Max to donate $20,000 to 20 different charities during her recent 20 Days of Kindness campaign. One of the charities originally included Exodus Cry, an evangelical group that works to end sexual exploitation and human trafficking. But when McCarthy announced that charity, articles like this one from the Daily Beast were released. Titles like, "Why are HBO and Melissa McCarthy raising money for an anti-abortion group?" citing how the group's founder is against abortion. The mainstream media scrutiny drove McCarthy to revoke the donations to the group and to apologize.
We made a mistake and we backed a charity that, upon proper vetting, stands for everything that we do not. So I want to thank everyone on social media who said, "What are you doing? Are you sure you want to back this?" Because the answer is no, we do not.
To close out the donation campaign, McCarthy and HBO Max donated $20,000 to abortion giant Planned Parenthood.
Today, we get to close out this amazing campaign with Planned Parenthood. They deliver vital reproductive health care, sex education, and information to millions of women, men, and young people worldwide.
This was disappointing to see yet another celebrity cave to mainstream pressure and distance themselves from anything having to do with the pro-life issue. Defending the most vulnerable should not be controversial. It is, in fact, honorable. If Melissa McCarthy was trying to avoid controversy with her campaign, she should not have donated to Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion provider, which is currently facing new allegations of racism within its ranks. Having a business model centered around ending the lives of the unborn is incredibly controversial and problematic. In fact, it's anti-Christmas to donate to Planned Parenthood. Fortunately, we in the pro-life movement do not take our moral cues from Hollywood, but let us pray that public figures will begin to courageously stand for our most innocent.
It's important to make sure that they aren't going to be coerced to have an abortion because of the fact that they are in a difficult situation, because most women who have an abortion already are doing it because of financial lack. And what they need is resources. They need support. They need aid, not the termination of their children, which is a decision that they can never come back from.
That was pro-life speaker Christina Bennett testifying this week as the only pro-life witness during a virtual subcommittee hearing on abortion funding. Held on the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception this week, House Democrats called the hearing, saying it's time to repeal the Hyde Amendment. That amendment, which has long enjoyed bipartisan support for over 40 years, prevents the taxpayer funding of abortion. Bennett was the only witness to counter the pro-abortion talking points from the three other women on the panel. And for this week's Pro-Life Focus, we're joined now on Skype with pro-life speaker and communications director at the Family Institute of Connecticut, Christina Bennett. Christina, welcome back, and thank you for your pro-life testimony this week. During the congressional hearing, House Democrats repeatedly claimed the Hyde Amendment is discriminatory and racist. What's your response?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me back on, Catherine. And my response is that it's ridiculous to think that an amendment that has helped save over 2.4 million lives, many of them primarily African American, Black, Latino, that is racist. It's just insane how they've twisted this entire narrative to think that this is a negative thing. People are fighting for Black lives. People are fighting for Black women and Latino women to be able to have a prosperous life and to bear their children, to have a legacy, to take care of their offspring. That's what we should all want. We should all want there to be a decrease in abortions, and that's what Hyde helps to do.
And during the hearing, Christina, you said it's actually the abortion industry that's rooted in racism. Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. I pointed out that all across the country, Planned Parenthood is in a moment of reckoning where they are finally admitting that they have racist roots. We saw that in New York, where the Planned Parenthood in Manhattan, they removed Margaret Sanger's name from their building because they wanted to distance themselves from her legacy, which includes the Negro Project and targeting the Black community. In addition, just recently, a Planned Parenthood in Pennsylvania, they fired one of their main leaders, and they wrote an open letter in which they admitted that some of them knew going into the organization that they had roots of white supremacy, but they thought they would be able to change it. And so we are seeing all across the country different Planned Parenthood groups admit that they have not only a racist history, but right now, people that are in key positions are racist and that they're hurting employees and also clients.
Christina, this week's House subcommittee hearing had 4 panelists. 3 were pro-abortion advocates. You were the only pro-life witness. What was that experience like, and were you intimidated at all?
I was anxious going into it. I will admit that, because the other witnesses, they have a lot of different experiences that I've never had to. It felt a little bit like a David and Goliath kind of a situation. But I just prayed a lot. and I had a lot of people praying for me. And so I had confidence that God chose me.
That's beautiful. Christina, how do you respond to claims that the Hyde Amendment holds back women from being empowered and that abortions will help them to succeed?
I think that we have heard this lie for so long that it's actually sad that we're still believing it. I grew up with this lie. I grew up hearing this in high school and in college that women need abortion to be more successful. It's not true. One of the studies that I mentioned in my written testimony was a study which talks about 7 million women that were Medicaid eligible, and they looked at their history and they realized that the women who had an abortion, that it just led them to have more abortions. So if you have one abortion, that you're at a risk to have multiple abortions. And so we can see that this is just a band-aid. It doesn't cause women to be more successful. It doesn't bring forth liberation or freedom or all the different things that pro-abortion advocates promise. And it's exactly the opposite. In fact, so many women are suffering with pain, with regret, with shame. That's why they go to organizations like Rachel's Vineyard. That's why they go to groups like Support After Abortion for counsel and for help. And sometimes that's even 10, 20 years after, because it's taken them a long time to be able to deal with the pain. And that's just emotional stuff. That's not even touching on the physical things like botched abortions and the different ways that women suffer. So it's a complete lie. And we have to wake up and we have to just speak the truth, because this industry is hurting millions of women and families.
Well, thank you for speaking the truth. Christina Bennett with the Family Institute of Connecticut. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, coming to you from the Hadro home. Until next time, we'd love to hear from you. Find us on social media at EWTN Pro-Life on all social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, we're there. You can also send us a message by emailing prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. We love to hear from you. Remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.